Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Yaakov. I'll be the moderator tonight. And before I introduce myself, maybe I'll start with a short story. 6.5 years ago, I discharged from the Israeli army from a decade of service in a tank unit called the 188. And don't ask me why, but my first day as a civilian, a day after discharging, I went on a military tour, to a site that is about 15 minutes away from my home here in the center of the Golan Heights. The site's name is Tel Saki. And I was on a tour with one of the veterans of the battle from my unit, the 188 Armored Brigade. And aside from the fact that the story was incredible, what I remember more than anything from that day is what happened at the end of the tour. We finished the tour, and there's we'll see videos of Tel Saki in a moment. We'll see there's an amphitheater there. I'm sitting down there with a group of officers, and the commander of the unit wanted to thank the veteran, his name is Neil, Sergeant Neil, for giving us this incredible tour. And he looks at him and he says, Neil, thank you so much for willing to come back here each time to tell us your story. I was sitting in the back row, and by me was a 70-something-year-old veteran who was the commander of Nir's armored battalion in the Yom Kippur War. And he started laughing. And I sort of gave him a little elbow, and I said, sir, what's so funny? And he says to me, Neil doesn't come back here. He just never left. He lives on this hill. In that moment, I understood that Tel Saki is much more than another military story. And we call this webinar tonight, The Battle Still Raging, because as this commander said about his soldier from 1973, he is still on the hill. The battle is still raging, and the Yom Kippur War, which we are now 50 years after, is still raging. And that's what we're going to discuss tonight. My name is Yaakov Selavan. I'm an IDF Major in reserves. I was born and raised by American parents. That's where my English is from. I grew up in the old city of Jerusalem, and I moved up here to the Golan Heights, where I'm speaking to you from a decade ago due to my military service. As I said, I served in the 188 Armored Brigade. In the last 6.5 years, I've been serving in the unit, the same exact unit in the 188, as the unit's combat operations officer and as the unit's motivational speaker, or if you call it in the Army's official name, a heritage officer. My job is to take the heritage of our unit and in general, the heritage of the IDF and pass it on to the younger generation to empower them, to show them what they're capable of and to understand what are they part of. And tonight, I'm actually here on behalf of a national initiative that's called Bishvil Hanoflim. Bishvil Hanoflim in Hebrew has a double meaning. It also means for the fallen, or the fallen soldiers, but it also means Bishvil. Shvil is a path. And this initiative is a joint effort of several government offices, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Heritage, together with the Israeli Defense Forces and together with other education organizations, including JNF, Keren Kayemet Israel, and the World Zionist Organization. And what we do is, in the week between Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, to Yom HaZikaron, tonight, Israel's Memorial Day, we have tours, dozens of tours all around the country with senior officers, with bereaved families, and we walk. We travel the country, we walk in nature, we walk at battle sites, and what we try doing is creating a connection and a bond in the field, in nature, with the families, hearing the stories of their beloved ones. This year, we even had an English-speaking tour for the first time, and this is the second time we're doing this international webinar, and this is a great chance for us to thank our sponsors for tonight. Our main sponsor is a great organization I've known as a commander for already 18 years. It's called Think Israeli Soldiers. It's a great organization that supports various initiatives that embrace, educate, and empower soldiers, educational programs, transition programs for soldiers who are about to go back into civilian life, and of course, care packages and help for needy soldiers. And our additional sponsor is another great organization called Yad La'olim, which gives assistance and educational programs and government advocacy for Olim, for immigrants to Israel. And it's great to see tonight that we have a very, very wide range. We see here in the chat people from all around Israel. And as we said, we have Germany and United States and Canada and even New Zealand and Sweden and others. I want to start with maybe one little message from a dear person who, due to his new job as the chairman of the Jewish agency, couldn't join us physically tonight. Major General Doron Almog is one of the most inspiring people in Israel and in the world, if you ask me. And tonight, when we relive the story of the Battle of Tel Saki, we'll be discussing also the falling of his brother, Eran. So, Major General Doron Almog, his message to us.
My brother was killed in the first night of Yom Kippur War, October 6, 1973, on his way to Tel Saki. He was shot by a Syrian tank, thrown outside, bleeding near his burning tank, 7 days, evacuated, dead already. My commitment to continue serving as combat soldier, as commander, is due to the loss of my beloved brother that was left behind. My oath was to never leave a wounded soldier behind. The fallen soldiers' pass is our commitment for those who gave their life, for those who sacrificed their life for the continuity of the state of Israel, our beloved country. We owe them and we owe ourselves to continue their legacy and to continue the readiness to do the maximum effort to protect the only Jewish state. This is our commitment and this is our supreme credo for our nation and for the one miracle and only, the third temple, the state of Israel.
So friends, what we're going to be doing in the next few minutes, I'll be sharing with you the story of the Battle of Tel Saki. Of course, I will refer also to HBO Max's series Valley of Tears, or Shat Neila, as it was in Israel. And I'm going to do it very briefly because, for me at least, as someone who's given hundreds of talks about the Battle of Tel Saki, the most exciting thing tonight, the most special thing actually tonight, is we're going to have the ability to hear the story of Hava, the bereaved sister of Sergeant Jacob Rayman of blessed memory, and we'll have a discussion with her. So let's begin in our journey, and I'll be taking you now to the Golan Heights, totally objectively the most beautiful place in Israel, in northeast Israel, on the border with Syria. And tonight on Yom HaZikaron, I won't be talking about nature and about the incredible things that Golan has to offer you. You'll have to come to Israel in other days and to experience the beauty of the Golan. We're here to talk about the Battle of Tel Saki. A word about the Golan Heights for those who are not familiar. What's important when you talk about strategic importance of the Golan Heights is the height. Two things make the Golan Heights so important. First of all, if you are now in the Golan Heights, you are controlling the northern Galilee. And even maybe more important, we're in the Middle East, a very dry region, and the Golan Heights controls the Sea of Galilee, Kinneret, and the waterheads of the Sea of Galilee. And that's why it was so important for Israel to redeem the Golan in 1967 in the Six-Day War, in the last 2 days of the war. And now we're going to go right away to October 6, 1973, 6 years later, the Syrians want revenge. The Syrians want to conquer the Golan. And I'm taking you now to a small hill in the south of the Golan, right here. We're looking now, this is the south, and we're looking east towards Syria. And I'm taking you to a small hill called Tel Saki. This is Tel Saki. And as we fly up it, I want to point out a few things. First of all, if right now you're looking at Tel Saki, everything you're seeing in front of you is Syria. This hill is 4,000 feet away from the border. And you see the hill has two parts to it. The upper part is a huge military complex, which I'll probably mention several times, wasn't here in 1973. Everything you see up here wasn't here in 1973. The only thing that was on this hill when the war began is this small little bunker here that right now is located in the bottom of the hill. And that's something important to remember. We understand this hill gives you a good view at the Syrian border. And what happens is that a young commander named Menachem of the Israeli paratroopers, young religious officer, is sent on an ordinary lookout mission. His job is to look at the Syrian border and report if there's anything that's happening there. No one was expecting a war. I told you this guy is religious. He's focused, if you ask me, on his prayers. And what he does is that he sends the rest of his soldiers, he has 5 soldiers with him, he sends his soldiers to rest in that little bunker that I pointed at before. About 1.5 miles away from Tel Saki, there were 3 more tanks from my unit, from the 188. Their commander's name is Lieutenant Yoav. Don't get confused if you've watched Valley of Tears with the Lieutenant Yoav from the series. And these are the 2 young commanders in the south of the Golan who are facing a mass Syrian attack a few minutes before 2 p.m. And we need to understand, if we look at all the southern Golan, and again, I want to focus on personal stories, but it's important to understand, we're talking about less than 100 Israeli soldiers facing roughly 11,000 Syrian soldiers. The 3 tanks from the 188 of Lieutenant Yoav are facing 50, 60 tanks just in the front line. Enormous numbers. For the first few hours of the war, the tanks are able to hold back the Syrians. When the night comes down, there's a turning point in the battle. It's dark, our soldiers are not equipped properly, they cannot see a thing. The Syrians are getting closer and closer now. The soldiers are running out of ammunition. They have no heavy ammunition, heavy shells left to shoot. And the casualties begin. Lieutenant Yoav himself is killed during his heroic attempts to stop the Syrians with his own machine guns. He has no heavy ammunition left. And finally, the Syrians are able to invade into Israel. The Syrians invade into Israel. If you see there's a mountain here, this is where the invasion happens. Some of the Syrians start moving to the heart of the Golan, and some are coming on this road towards Tel Saki. And during the night, there's attempts to reinforce the region. People understand that something bad is happening. The first team of tanks that's sent from north to south to reinforce Tel Saki includes Lieutenant Eran Abrutsky, the brother of Major General Doron Halmov, who spoke with us before. Unfortunately, the Syrians are controlling the road, and this force of tanks goes into an ambush. Only half of the tanks make it to Tel Saki. 12 soldiers are killed in this attempt. Since these tanks have ammunition in them, the tanks of the 188 get a call to come to Tel Saki also. So if you notice, friends, more and more troops are gathering around that little hill. By sunrise, the Syrians have completed taking over the whole valley we see here under Tel Saki, and Menachem is under pressure. He's in a face-to-face battle facing the Syrians, and he calls for help. The first rescue attempt by the Israeli paratroopers are tried coming from this road to come up this hill, and unfortunately, the Syrians, who are already controlling the road and are very close, are able to eliminate this attempt. In this attempt, Jacob Rayman is one of the soldiers who falls. One of 12 soldiers who were killed in this attempt. Only 2 soldiers survived this attempt. Shortly after, there's another attempt. Just understand, each one of these missions is a suicidal mission. You're going into enemy soil, trying to help and rescue your friends. And unfortunately, also, the second attempt fails with casualties, with people killed, with people wounded. And when the sun fully rises on the south of the Golan, on the morning of October 7, 1973, Menachem, the young commander of Tel Saki, understands the game is over. Everywhere he looks around him, there are Syrians. There are Syrians to his north. There are Syrians here. There are Syrians here. There are Syrians here. And Syria is this direction. He's surrounded. He lost the battle. There were attempts by the Air Force to help these guys. You can see here a photo taken from Tel Saki on October 6th of one of the planes crashing down just below the hill. By the way, one of the pilots fell in prison. The second pilot, as he described it to me, hitchhiked. Tanks tried helping them, as we discussed. Paratroopers tried helping them. Many people have died trying in these attempts. No one can help him. He has no food or water storages. He's shooting his last bullets. He lost the battle. Usually what you do when you lose is you retreat, you pull back. But in this case, they're surrounded. And that leaves the soldiers only one option, and that's to hide in the small bunker that's on the top of the hill. This is the entrance to the bunker. Photo taken right after the Yom Kippur War. And this is the bunker. Just look into this small room, a very, very small room. This is what it looked like. What you can see here is that if my chest is now the room, there were 2 sleeves leading inside, shaping an L from each direction. So if you're standing outside, you see 2 tunnels that lead into the little room. You don't know if it goes underground. All you see is darkness. And I can tell you that in this little bunker, there were 3 bunk beds. This room was originally designed for 6 soldiers. However, 28 soldiers retreat into this small room. 28 soldiers are in this small space, mostly wounded. Some are critically wounded. They have no food, they have no water, and they have no ammunition. They have basically no way to protect themselves. And the Syrians come up the hill. If I'd ask you how long would it take the Syrians to kill the soldiers in here, you'd probably tell me between 1 minute to 1 grenade. However, I can tell you that 27 out of 28 soldiers survived. They were in this small room from the early morning of October 7, 1973, to the late afternoon of October 8, when finally Israeli reservists come, reinforcements, and are able to push the Syrians back to Syria and rescue the soldiers. I claim that this story is one of the most incredible stories, if not the most incredible story in the history of the Israeli army. And friends, what makes this story so unique is that from this point on, it's no longer a military story. It's a human story. It's no longer a story of war heroes fighting for their country or war heroes who are trying to save their friends. That's it, they're helpless. It's a story of a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds who just care about survival now. They just want to get home to their mamas. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they're wounded, they're petrified. Every minute is the last minute of their life. You can understand that in 36 hours, there are many incredible moments, many incredible stories. Of course, probably everyone wants to ask, how did they survive? So I'll just say that you can, in these dilemmas, I can just mention a few. What do you do if now there are artillery bombs falling outside? Syrian soldiers are running for cover, and 2 of them find themselves standing in the bunker you're hiding in. This is a dilemma the soldiers faced. And Menachem, the commander, understands the Syrians were literally at the doorstep inside the bunker, and he realized that if they take a few steps inside, it's over. Menachem says, if we die as heroes. And he asks all the soldiers to take out their hand grenades. It's a toy, of course. Not that I can do anything with it now when you're on the screen. And he asks everyone to unlock the grenade and hold on tightly And when the Syrians come in, he says, we'll let go. So we'll attack them and they'll probably kill us, but at least we'll kill them also. The Syrians, for some reason, don't come in. Maybe they were scared. And after a couple of minutes, they even leave. And now that the Syrians leave, the soldiers can breathe. And Menachem asks everyone to very, very carefully pick up their locks and relock their grenade. And everyone follows the order, except for one soldier that says, has anyone seen a grenade lock? He lost it. And there's a problem, right? Houston, we have a problem. You can't get rid of the grenade and toss it outside because the Syrians know you're alive. You can't hold on to it because you're exhausted. You haven't slept in a day. Menachem finds a very creative solution. You guys can't see, but I also have this on my head, a yarmulke. Unlike me, I use double-sided tape. Menachem, I told you, was religious. He used one of these, a bobby pin, for his yarmulke, for his kippah. And this is what he uses to lock the grenade and solve the problem. If this is just one little story, but about improvisation. But now, what do you do if you're hiding in the bunker quietly and your friend who's critically wounded, and what you don't realize about him is that his eardrums were hit and he is deaf, and he starts now screaming for water. He's endangering everyone. Everyone says to him, be quiet, but he can't hear a thing. Menachem gives the toughest order possible. He gives an order to knock him out, understanding this might be a one-way ticket. Luckily enough, one of the soldiers has an idea. He quickly takes out cigarettes, takes out a used match, and on the paper of the box of cigarettes, he scrapes with the ashes and tells his friend, the Syrians are here, be quiet. He lights another match, shows his friend, and saves his life. And maybe I'll end with the final craziest dilemma. What do you do if now the Syrians are attacking the bunker, your friends are getting hit one after another, and you're the only person who can stand on your feet and walk outside and maybe stop the Syrians? The only soldier who can answer this question is a young tankist named Isaac from the 188. He says, I'll do it. He walks out. The guys heard shots and screaming, and then there was silence, and the Syrians left. What the soldiers understood is that the Syrians killed him. They don't take prisoners. But this guy succeeds in saving his friends. 5 months after the Yom Kippur War is over, Isaac's family receives a photo of a mysterious prisoner the Israeli intelligence can't recognize in Syria. This turns out to be their son. And if you're wondering how on earth is this guy alive, so this picture will explain how was he saved. Isaac is a tankist in the 188s. And what you see here is a photo I showed you before of a plane crashing below Tel Saki. And if you remember, the pilot hitchhiked. Now, what you need to know about tankists is there are three things that make us very different than other units. First of all, we're better. No, I'm kidding. Secondly, we're more humble. And the third thing, and most important for our story, is that we dress with much more style. This is a tankist outfit. And I can tell you that it's very similar to another outfit that another unit uses, and that's our pilots. Syrians who have knocked down a plane and caught only one pilot are searching for the missing pilot. And then a few hours after they knocked down a pilot and saw a guy parachuting, they come to a small bunker, they throw grenades at it, and the Israeli pilot, so-called, walks out and surrenders. Is he a pilot? No. Does it make sense to the Syrians that he's a pilot? Yes. They keep him alive, and only after a few days, when he's being interrogated in Damascus, Syria, they realize they got the wrong guy. But the soldiers who are hiding in the bunker of Tel Saki are saved. This soldier, Isaac, spent 8 months in Syrian prison. He returned to Israel in a prisoner's deal. Only then he found out that he saved his friends. He thought the Syrians killed him after they took him. He found out they're alive. They found out he's alive. They thought he was dead. He named his firstborn son. When he came back to Israel, he got married, and he named his firstborn son Yoav, after his beloved commander. The godfather of Isaac's firstborn son was the bereaved father of Lieutenant Yoav, who was killed in the battle we spoke about. I'll end with saying regarding the story of the battle, and I'll say a word about Valley of Tears, and then I want to give the mic to Hava. I'll just say that the soldiers were rescued after 36 long hours, But I cannot end the story saying that's it. They were rescued and they lived happily ever after, because they didn't. And I started with the story of Sergeant Nir, and I told you how his commander told me he lives on this hill. The story of Tel Saki is not just the story of the battle of defense and the rescue battle, which Jacob Rayman took part in. And it's not just a battle of survival. It's also an ongoing battle over the soul. And maybe at the end, we'll say a few words about that and about the whole deal of PTSD, which is something that the soldiers of Tel Saki helped raise awareness for. So I'll just say, when we go now to this story, I'll just say this story was unknown for about 30 years. The soldiers didn't talk about it too much. The importance of this battle and how it helped slowing down the Syrians wasn't clear to anyone. And 30 years later, it's time to reunite. The soldiers reunite from the tanks, from the paratroopers, with the bereaved families. They come to Tel Saki. Since then, they've been coming to Tel Saki. They come twice every year. One time they come, this is the reunion after 30 years. One time they come is going to be tomorrow, Yom HaZikaron. You can see a photo from last year. We had over 1,000 people on this hill. If you would come 20 years ago, you might have had 10 people. And the second time they meet, these are photos from last year's ceremony. The second time they meet is on the 12th of Tishrei, which is the Hebrew date of the rescue. And that's when they come for what they call their birthday party. The day they were liberated from the bunker, they come to mark that day. And I've been coming for 6 years now to this reunion, just for these moments, for these hugs between these soldiers who are a band of brothers, also now 50 years later. So that's the story of this hill. And a word about the series. The series Shat Neila, Valley of Tears, was a high point of the story of Tel Saki. I told you the story was unknown for many years. And suddenly people started talking about it. And the fighters started coming. And Daniel Magor, one of the guys who were on the rescue team, a very good friend of Jacob Rayman, helped develop the site. You saw the beautiful monument and the flag. And 3 years ago, I was part of a logistics team helping the filming crew of Shat Neila. The Valley of Tears was actually filmed at Tel Saki. For those who haven't watched the series or need a reminder, the series has basically 3 stories that collide at the end. One story is of Mount Ramon, the highest mountain in Israel. And you can see a picture from the series. It was filmed at Tel Saki. I'll show in a moment how. The second story is of a tank platoon that finds itself running out of ammunition, coming to a small hill, joining a team of paratroopers, and hiding in a small bunker. Sounds familiar. The last story, which we're not going to talk about tonight, is of a father, a journalist who's looking for his missing son in battle. So,
טנקים סורים בדרך עלינו. לעצור את האויב לפני שהוא מגיע לגדר. חוד קיבלתי, עולה לעמדה. בהצלחה חבר'ה.
This is the scene of the tank platoon, and this is Sergeant Neil telling the story of his tank platoon, the platoon we spoke about, Lieutenant Yoav, to the crew, to the actors. So we understand that this is one connection. The second story is Hill 87, a hill with a small bunker we told you about. Look at this replica they made of the bunker. It looks familiar. And so Tel Saki is basically the heart of the series. The writers said that everything they did in the series, they were inspired by the story of Tel Saki. They couldn't put every story inside, but even PTSD, which the series dealt with in length, was because of their discussions with the soldiers. One last thing of behind the scenes, and then I told you I have the main part of the evening in my eyes.
אתה צריך להתקשר לשופר.
אין קצין באמן שלא שמע מה אתה חושב ומת לחנוק אותך.
יאללה חברים, מה חתימה טובה, שבת שלום לכולם.
And this is the same exact room you just saw. This is the bunker that was built after the Yom Kippur War, which has an inner memorial room to it. And this is where it was filmed. This is a photo from August 2019, the filming. Look what you see around the hill. This is Tel Saki. You see a blue screen. And if this is a scene from, you see Mount Ramon all around you, this is what it looks like. So anyone who watched the series saw Mount Hermon. This is it. One last thing I'll show you, which was the craziest moment in filming at Tel Saki. The moment, and if you haven't seen the series, we'll have a discussion with Hava about it in a moment, probably. But I do encourage at least adults to watch it. It does have importance. It does give a few positive things. When the war breaks out, there were actual explosions at Tel Saki for the first time since the Yom Kippur War. And this is actually what it looked like. Second. Here. So I had the privilege, as someone who's very involved at Tel Saki, to accompany the filming of the series. And I'll just say the series, I'll give you just a word about my perspective. The series has a lot of negative things. I have a lot of negative things to say about it. Different actors, different misleading or wrong facts, different things, the political agendas that were put in. But I do believe that it had an incredible impact, bringing the stories of the soldiers to the younger generation. I've given over 100 tours at Tel Saki in the last 2 years, just to teenagers who came to hear about the backstory of the series. It wouldn't have happened without the series. It would say something that maybe I would be probably the youngest guy interested in this war. The second thing it did, and you can see here an article from the New York Times, it raised public awareness for PTSD. And the whole country was talking for 2 months about PTSD. There were discussions at the parliament. You can see an article here from the New York Times. And this was a great contribution that this series gave to raising awareness. So that's why I view it very positively. So that's the story of Tel Saki. That's the story of Valley of Tears. And now I got to say, I've told this story hundreds of times. I am very, very excited tonight, very honored to have a special guest here with us. We mentioned several fighters, several names, and one of the names I mentioned was Yaakov Shmuel Ramon, or Jacob Rayman, who is part of the first rescue team of the paratroopers. Jacob is the older brother of Hava, who's with us here tonight. Here we go. I'm going to put Hava. Are you with us? You can unmute yourself, and I'm going to put you. I see here Hava's husband with us.
Yes, please refer to the window named Rafi Rembrand. Because of communication issues, she's using my computer. Okay.
That's all good. Wonderful. Okay, Hava, you can unmute now.
Here we go. Hello.
Okay. Yeah, let's spotlight you for everyone. Okay.
Hi.
So, Hava, first of all, thank you for joining us. Especially on Yom HaZikaron, on the evening of Yom HaZikaron. It's not something we can take for granted, and we appreciate it a lot. Before we talk about Jacob, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Okay, I came to talk about Jacob, but I'll just tell you that I was born Eve Leah Rayman in Seattle, Washington in 1956. And my father, Dr. Mortimer Solon Rayman, is a native Chicagoan and a family physician, he passed away. And my mother, Ruth Berman Rayman, a native of Newark, New Jersey, was a psychiatric social worker. My only sibling was Jacob. My parents were not active Zionists, and I thought this might interest people abroad. How they came to Israel, they were very affected by the lead up to the 6 Days War, as were many American Jews at the time. And they felt guilty about not helping the European Jews in World War II, although both of my parents were in Europe in 1946. My father as a physician in the US Army, and my mother as a social worker with the Joint, working in displaced persons camps. They decided quite abruptly to make Aliyah in June 1968 after asking when did the school year begin in Israel, and we landed in Israel on September 1st, 1968. I was in 7th grade and Jacob was supposed to be in 10th grade. And our new names became Moshe, Ruth, Yaakov, and Hava, Ramon. My brother was killed when I was 17, and I'll talk about him soon, I hope. I married my husband, Rafi, when I was 20, and we have 3 children, Ela, Rachel, and Yaakov, whom we call Yankala. And we live in a small town of Tivon in the north of Israel. And I'm an academic librarian at the Emek Yisrael Academic College, and will soon retire. That's about me.
Okay. Maybe can you tell us about Jacob as, I don't know if a child, but as a teenager coming with you from Seattle to Israel?
Sure. Yeah, well, first of all, from an early age, he had a great love of music, and he played the clarinet in the school band, and in junior high, took up the saxophone, the tenor saxophone, and then the drums. And with several childhood friends, he created a band called, believe it or not, The Chosen Few. I was their drummer, and they played at bar mitzvahs and school parties and enjoyed great popularity among their peers. And when we made Aliyah, he was 15. At that year, the classes were full in all the good high schools in Jerusalem due to a teachers' strike. Ever heard of one of those? Demanding only 30 students in a class. So Jacob was forced to be held back a year and put in the 9th grade in a mediocre high school. In the mid-year, there was an opening at the Boyer High School, which is an excellent school, but it was in the 10th grade, his grade. So he was told that he would have to repeat the year. He could come for half a year and then repeat it, which of course gave him the incentive to really study diligently. And at the end of the year, he was promoted to the 11th grade together with his classmates, even though he started out not being fluent in Hebrew at all. And then he chose biology as a major in high school and spent much time collecting plant samples and identifying them, something that he would do in the future with his love, Simchona. During his high school years, he was described, like in the yearbook, as sloppily dressed, long-haired, good-humored, having an American accent in Hebrew, of course, sensitive, romantic, idealistic, and the first to join in various pranks and practical jokes. He was usually the head of any group that was having a good time. He was tall, 6'2", good-looking, with piercing brown eyes and a thick, long brown hair, with a boyish grin, and very popular with the girls. Do you want me to go on and tell about his army time?
So, you know, he chooses to go to the paratroopers, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And you're his younger sister. What is it like as you made Aliyah, right? You didn't grow up in the Israeli culture where everyone goes to the army and everyone knows everyone, and suddenly your brother is a paratrooper.
Well, first of all, he wasn't a paratrooper from the beginning. He joined the Nachal, and he was in an agricultural settlement where, among other things, that he herded sheep on the Golan Heights at Kshur for a year with Simchona, and they used to go out and identify wildflowers and watch migrating birds. So that was different. And then he became a medic, which made my father extremely happy. And during his time also at the Nachal settlement, his love of rock music was very renowned. He always had a small portable record player in his room, and from Janis Joplin, Cat Stevens to Jethro Tull and Jimi Hendrix, a good time was had by all musically wherever he was. But when he went to his medical course, he dove into this new pastime with great vigor and enthusiasm, which he did everything. And what happened was that he would come home and he would force us all to have IVs and to practice on us. And then during his paratrooper training, which came towards the end of his army career, he convinced his commanding officer, Menachem Ansbacher from Tel Saki, to teach the other soldiers in the unit how to give each other intravenous infusions. And so with many creative ways, they managed to commandeer enough infusion bags for them to practice on each other. And this, of course, gave my father, a physician, great pride and joy. And they spent many an hour discussing combat first aid and medicine. And at that time, he also decided to become a doctor. He took leave from the army to study for exams and improve his matriculation exam results. And he applied to medical school, making my father even more proud. And what happened was, behind a fun-loving and mischievous exterior, he became a very serious and diligent and industrious student with a brilliant and creative mind.
And if I take you,
well, I had great love for Simchona. You just showed her picture.
Who I think is also with us tonight, from what I saw. This is a photo you sent me a few days ago, a picture that was taken a week before Yom Kippur, 1973.
It's kind of distorted, though.
I'll put it again afterwards.
But yeah, it's a very bad photo, but it was taken on around Rosh Hashanah when he came home on leave, and then he went to guard the front line and with Syria on the Golan Heights just before Yom Kippur.
When did you hear that Jacob was killed?
Only a week later. What happened was that because there were so many casualties those first few days, and there was the attack, Tel Saki was conquered, and then there was the counterattack and taken back. So there was a great confusion, and there were many, many wounded and dead, and a lot of unknown. So we were only told a week later. During that week, we lived in great fear, because we knew from Simchona that part of their group of army buddies had come down from the Golan, but we did not hear from Jacob. So we feared the worst, but hoped for the best. And until they knocked on our door one day.
It's hard to ask. I guess it's a bit of an oblivious question, but what was your reaction? I mean,
well, what happened was they actually did a really good job, the army officers. What they did was they knocked on the neighbor's door and asked who's home and where does my father work. And they sent him to the hospital where my father worked. And they told him there. And then he came back to our house with them. They knocked on the door, and I was in the shower, and for just a fluke, I was at home, because during that time I was delivering the post and the telegrams in Hava in Jerusalem, where we lived. That's what I did, because I was in 12th grade, and everybody volunteered to take the place of people who were in the reserves. So I happened to be home that morning, and I heard my mother scream, and she threw them out of the house. She didn't want to talk to them, and my father. And we all hugged, and it was about 15 minutes till I dared to ask, is he wounded or is he dead? Because I hadn't heard your initial announcement. I was in another room. So that was very difficult. And then we notified the entire family.
And most of the family is in the US, right?
But I had grandparents that had made Aliyah with us. And so my father made sure that they were okay. Nobody had a heart attack. He was the doctor looking out for everybody. And then he got up and he left. And he went to the head of the medical operations, the commanding officer of the medical corps. And he drove there. It's not in Jerusalem, outside of Jerusalem, in Tzrifin. And he demanded to be recruited as a doctor on the front line. And how I know he asked for the front line? He told us he was just going to work in a hospital. But he said, I demand the front line, because there happened to be a journalist in the room. And the next day in Ma'ariv, there was an article. Her name was Ofra Eliagon. Ofra Eliagon, and the article was titled, "The Bereaved Father Goes to the Front." But of course, they sent him to the front. He spent his time on evacuating wounded soldiers by airplane from Refidim in Sinai to medical centers in the center of Israel. So he did not.
Just so I understand, first of all,
Yeah.
that means you said my father left.
Mhm.
He didn't, in Jewish tradition, when someone dies and is brought to burial, there's a shiva, 7
Well,
days.
first of all, we weren't at his burial. He was at a temporal burial. But we did sit Shiva until it was Sukkot already and we couldn't sit anymore. And he wasn't with us. He would come every other day or something or come to sleep, but he wasn't with us. And both my mother and I understood that's what he needed. He needed to do something. Problem was my mother didn't speak much Hebrew, so I was the one who met with all the people who came to give their condolences. And I grew up pretty fast.
And then you see this on the paper, this article, right? A bereaved father goes to the front line.
Yeah, and then we found out what he had said, that he wanted to go to the front line, but he wasn't on the front line. They knew better than that. They put him just on the air evacuation. Yeah, so that was my father's response. He had to do something, and his response also was to become more and more idealistic and Zionistic. More of a Zionist. After the war, we were very close with Menachem Ansbacher and his family, and they moved for part of the week at least, because he had a practice in Jerusalem. He moved to Ma'ale Adumim, which was just an outpost at that time, a very small settlement, and they felt they were being more chalutzim. And this
Pioneers.
Pioneers. They were pioneering, and he felt that he needed to do that. And he was a doctor, of course, until they became a city and it was moved. And so they moved back to Jerusalem. They didn't feel like they weren't needed so much anymore, but they did donate a library to Ma'ale Adumim. But that was their response. And it's interesting because I know that all our family in the US expected us to move back after my brother was killed, but the response was the opposite.
They say that the 73 war is a watershed line in Israeli society. Politically, military-wise, some will even say religiously. And really, a lot of people, it was sort of like a breaking of the dream, right? The Zionist dream. And the people basically, I can say, who established the state of Israel, this, I can say my great aunt was one of them. She lost her son. This was like a breaking point. Sort of was losing hope. So it's interesting that you're saying that your family expected y'all to move back, and you decided to go even to strengthen your roots in Israel.
Exactly. Yes.
And then, not long after, you turn 18.
Yeah, a year later.
A year later.
Yes, but I must say that at that time, there were no women in combat. And so it wasn't anything dangerous, but I was terrified that they were going to make me be a Hava soldier. A Hava soldier is a woman soldier who works for the police and checks bags for the people coming in the cinema, which pretty boring. Not what I wanted to do in the army. I wanted to do something meaningful. I wanted to.
Did your mother want you to do something meaningful?
Yeah, she didn't. I think she was pretty good about it. Yeah. Now that I'm a mother and a grandmother, maybe I really appreciate her being that way. At the time, though, there wasn't any problem. I went to a kibbutz. I was in the Nachal, and then I was in a settlement in Pitchat Rafiach, which is south of the Gaza Strip. But at those times, it actually was quite safe. I mean, I would hitchhike with an Uzi to our Nachal settlement, and there we grew vegetables, and I also became a medic. So
in some ways, so you said you were also in a Nachal settlement. You were also a medic. In some ways, you followed Jacob's footsteps.
In some ways, but I decided not to become a doctor, that I wanted to live my own life. And it was a hard time. I had several serious discussions, mostly with my father, but also with my mother. And they made me feel that I didn't have to take his place and do what he did. I could do my own thing. That was important. But I did spend most of my life looking after my parents, even though they didn't ask me to. I felt like I needed to. Okay.
And where did you feel maybe the absence? You know, your older brother, your beloved, admired brother is no longer with you. Where did you feel the absence? And a question also we got from the crowd here is, I think it was something that was also very much emphasized in Valley of Tears, in Shat Ne'ilah, the lack of preparedness. The signs were all on the wall, the swore. Everyone knew something's going to happen, and our intelligence and decision makers were blind. And your brother basically was there almost alone in the front line and paid the heaviest price. Is there anger?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll answer the first question. You wanted to know, wait a minute.
Is there the feeling of absence? Where do you feel absence?
Yes, and every important moment in my life, you know, when my children were born and they don't have an uncle, and they have their bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah, or my grandchildren and so on. So we're such a very small family. But one of the hardest times was when my father was ill and I had to sleep on a mattress on the floor in Hadassah Hospital, because every time I would leave, he would get confused and they would call me back. And here I am sleeping on the floor in a men's ward in Hadassah. And I keep thinking, where is my brother who was going to be a doctor? I need him here now. You know, so that was one of the times. But, you know, every important milestone in our life, he's gone. Yeah. So I miss him a lot, sure.
And regarding the anger?
Okay, anger, I must say that I'm very angry, but I'm not angry. I'm angry mostly with Moshe Dayan and maybe Golda Meir for not calling in the reserves the day before when they realized they had made a mistake with their intelligence, and the so-called exercise was going to be a war. And they knew that the day before, and they sacrificed the young soldiers who were on the front line, and they didn't even tell them and give them enough information and allow them to be prepared. So they were just told that there was going to be a small skirmish or a small battle, that's all. But they did know what was going to happen, and they did not call the reserves. And I don't forgive them for that, and I'm angry. I'll never forgive Moshe Dayan, who was our hero when we made Aliyah. Moshe Dayan, oh, the mayor, they're wonderful. So I am angry, and I don't forgive them.
And before I ask you one more question that we got here, friends, feel free to write us in the chat. You can write us privately. You can write me, and I'll read out the question, or write everyone. You know, suddenly 47, 48 years later, there's a series, and the whole country is talking about the series, and the series brings 1973 to life. I'm talking about Valley of Tears, of course. The young generation becomes very engaged, and in the heart of the series is the story that basically was going with you for decades. How do you feel what's your approach about Valley of Tears?
Well, I do find that there were many characters that were caricatures, which bothered me. But all in all, I think that there was one lesson that came through and was illustrated well in this series, and that is that the soldiers saved our country. The enlisted men, the non-commissioned officers, and the officers in active service, and the reservists, many of them volunteers who came from abroad just to fight. And they're the ones who saved our country, not the political leaders, maybe even not the big generals. It was the rank and file soldiers, both reservists and the enlisted men, who saved our country and fought from love of their own comrades, for love of their country. And I think that came through the Valley of Tears. So I appreciated that. I never felt that the war of the Yom Kippur War was not appreciated, because it was the war of my generation and everyone I knew. And we were very connected to the group of soldiers, especially after 30 years when they started the meetings. But fortunately, through Menachem, we were connected even before that. And so I felt that the Yom Kippur War was an important milestone in Israeli society, and the mechdal, we used to call it, the big mistake, and it was an eye opener for everyone, and it was known. It was well known and well appreciated. So I didn't need the Valley of Tears. The Valley of Tears was very important for a younger generation, those that don't have a family member who fought on the Golan in 1973. They learned a lot, and it opened up a lot of discussion. But for my generation, it's our war.
The Yom Kippur War is one of the most documented wars in the world. I think after World War I and II, it's like the third most documented. It's an incredible thing. When I meet West Point cadets and commander, they tell me about the war, things even I don't know. So the American Army even lives in and researches it. I'll just say, adding on to what you said, because I'm answering here also a question I got from Jonathan. What I really liked about the series, first of all, there was something about getting a feeling of the fear of the soldier in the front line. When the war breaks out, there's adrenaline and let's shoot and let's kill. And suddenly friends are getting hit and you see the fear. And for me, maybe one of the hardest scenes, I think it was one of, maybe the first scene that I shed a tear in, was how the soldiers at so-called Tel Saki in the series are being rescued. The reservists come to rescue them, and the reservists break down crying when they see these young guys and what they've gone through and what they look like after those days, and the bodies of the fallen soldiers around. And I think that was a scene that really showed it. People asked her about what was inaccurate. Many things. As a tankist, I can tell you for tankists, a lot of the little details we noticed, but let's not focus on that. Just for instance, I had a very interesting discussion with a professor from Tel Aviv University. She deals with collective memory. And she told me something interesting. She said that every time you take a series that deals with the past, you have to bring some social issue that's current. So the young generation connects it. For example, on different movies and series about Lebanon, there's a lot about the LGBT community, because that's something that the young generation deals with a lot. So here what they did is they took the Black Panthers, Sephardi Jews and Ashkenazi Jews fighting each other. If you look historically, the Black Panthers were still active at the beginning of 73, at the end of 73. It was going down, first of all. Secondly, I spoke with many, many veterans of the battle. And this point, they told me, we can forgive them for every mistake, for saying there were this amount of soldiers here, or this soldier that acted like this. The fact that they brought this inside, they said we had no discussion, no political arguments. It didn't matter who was Yemenite or Russian or Ashken or from Germany or from the United States. We all fought together. We were all here for the same mission. And that's something that came out in the series that young people asked me, wait, so what was it like? I mean, really, they preferred the Ashkenazi Jews and not the Sephardi? No, they didn't. Yoav Yakir, who I spoke about, was a kibbutz, from a kibbutz. There's a soldier named Shalom Fahima, who's Moroccan, who was killed in the bunker from a grenade hit. Isaac, who walked out of the bunker, is originally from India, made Aliyah at age 9, and Jacob came from Seattle, and they were all there for the same mission. Two excellent questions here. Sidney, you'll have to explain, what do you mean do you feel that the soldiers today feel that way? You'll have to explain to me what do you mean. Yehuda asks here a question for you, Hava. Were there any survivors of Jacob's unit in the last action who told you something about him at the last moments?
That is great, because that's something I really wanted to tell. So thank you. Yes, Yair Farjun was in the BTR, the
Armored Personal Carry.
Yes, and what happened was when they reached the Tel, they hit the BTR ahead of them. There were two of them, and they hit and they had to jump out, and the back door was locked, and some of them jumped right and some jumped left. My brother jumped right, I think, I may have this wrong, but it was right where the Syrians were. Their combat unit was there. And he was apparently killed almost instantaneously, got hit in the chest. But before he jumped, there were at least 2 soldiers who jumped left and survived. And one of them is Yair Farjun. And he told me that my brother's last words were, "Don't worry, Farjun, just call for Jacob and I'll be there." Those were his last words, because he was the medic. And then they both jumped. And the 2 that jumped to the left were the only ones that survived from that BTR, because they were on the other side, and they went through a lot and were seriously wounded, but they survived.
Wow.
So I'm very, very proud of my brother and of what he did. And I know that he did it willingly, and there was nothing in the world that could have stopped him from getting on that BTR to go and save Menachem Ansbacher, who he loved and admired, and his other comrades in arms. And he really believed in what he was doing. I'm very proud of him.
Okay, there's, wow, got me emotional here. So Mirka asks, as the war of our generation, like you called it, did the series, do you feel brought the visual vibe of Israel of 1973?
The series? Not really.
No.
Things. I mean, there was all that Bohemia, and no, that was part of Israel also, but the young people, like my brother, I don't know, I don't think they were really shown in the series, no.
I see.
Just as soldiers, but not as the whole vibe. No, not really.
Okay, so Sydney is asking now, do the soldiers today feel that camaraderie that we expressed during the Yom Kippur War, because it's a new generation?
Well, you can answer that. I'm not a soldier.
Wow. I'm also not a soldier, just reserves.
Reserves.
It's one of the things we're dealing with in the army. I can say when I was a company leader 10 years ago, I feel old now saying this, sorry. One of the biggest things we were dealing with was the smartphone effect. When Jacob was in basic training, I'll take a wild guess. After the commanders were getting them to work, they'd all go to the tent, and then they would talk to each other. Why did you run so slowly? Why didn't you make the effort? We did too much push-ups because of you. You slacked. They communicated. And a survey that was done in 2013 showed that when you ask a soldier, who can't you stand? Like, who's the most hated guy? It's the guys who are closer to them. Why? Because they finish doing their push-ups and they get punished and everything. And then they go back to their tent, and everyone takes out their smartphone. So that was something we are dealing with. It's a very big challenge, just like the whole young generation with smartphones. That being said, since I told you just today I met 300 soldiers, the moment you're out there doing it together with the stretcher in the middle of the night, in a bush on the Syrian border in freezing winter, there's nothing like the brotherhood, the camaraderie that's built in the military. Also today. So I hope the younger guys don't need to test this camaraderie, but at least my feeling is that there are very, very strong bonds that no other place can create till today. Maybe what lessons have we learned? I was gonna say, I want to conclude, but that's one hell of a question. Hava, you want to answer?
Yes, that the rank and file people make a difference. Everybody makes a difference, and they're the ones who save the country.
Yeah, and I think never be full of yourself. Never. Always question, always challenge. By the way, that's something Hava and I spoke about. She said it's our war, our generation. I told her for the Israeli soldiers today, it's still their war because it's such a great trauma in Israeli society, in the Israeli military, that the questioning your commander and challenging and never taking the conception that you're getting for the higher ranks is something you can't afford doing again. Talking about lessons, someone asked about the 2 failed rescue attempts that apparently were suicidal missions. They weren't viewed like that at the time. On the other hand, I think every single soldier who volunteered, they volunteered to go to the missions. They weren't forced to. They asked to go to it. More than that, more soldiers than the APCs were able to hold went to the mission. They knew probably there's a very, very big chance they're not going to come out of it alive. But as Hava said, as Jacob said, call me, I'll be there for you.
And also those that did not get to go on the mission were very, very traumatized by that.
One of the soldiers, Dan Almagor.
Names, but I know who told me that
right.
They were really traumatized by not being able to be on the rescue mission.
Yeah, I was told by Menachem that one of these soldiers 25 or 26 years later was sitting with him and he broke down crying and he said, "Why didn't you take me on the mission? Why?" And there is something about that. Hava, I think we can go on and on forever, but I also want you, I know you have to come up here to Tel Saki tomorrow. What I want to maybe before I finish, I want to conclude with one picture. And actually, it's not this picture, but this is a picture of Miki Levy, who was on the final rescue mission. He is a parliament member today and used to be the chairman of the parliament. Hugging Menachem, who he rescued from the bunker. One of the most incredible moments I experienced at Tel Saki. I wanted to finish with this picture. And I'll allow myself maybe to speak a word about the monument in the name of the Almagor family, or Dan Almagor, a great friend of Jacob. Dan told me this story actually yesterday. Dan, after the war, moved to the United States, but the war went with him. As we said, the battle is still raging. And Dan told me that when he reached Tel Saki in the final rescue mission after 36 hours, then there was a Syrian flag on Tel Saki. So he took down the flag and he wanted to put an Israeli flag. And he couldn't find a flag. So every armored personal carrier had like a big white flag to mark yourself if the Israeli Air Force flies over you so they don't bomb you by mistake. So he took that big white, I don't know if it's a flag even, and he took shoe polish and he put the stripes and a Jewish star and he put it up. And while he was taking care of the bodies of his best friends, he vowed that if one day he'll be able to, he'll do something in their memory. And 10 years ago, this beautiful monument was built with the faces of 32 fallen soldiers of the battle at Tel Saki and around it, with the words, "Friends never forget friends," and it says here in Hebrew, "Yizkor le'ut." I'll end with saying a word about this flag. In the last few years, I've been giving a lot of talks at Tel Saki. I became very engaged with the story, very engaged with the soldiers and the bereaved families. And eventually I became responsible for this huge flag, one of the biggest ones in Israel, by the way. And I'm being recorded, but I'll say off record that to go in the middle of lockdown of COVID, or to go on a snowy day to replace the ripped flag because it's ripped, is a pain in the you-know-what. And Dan always insists, when he gets a photo of the flag ripped, Yaakov, go take care of it right now. And we once had a discussion. I said, so the flag will be ripped. So you know what? I'll bring it down for a few days and I even can save some money because it's very expensive. And he said to me that this flag is there for two purposes. One, it's there so every Syrian person waking up on the other side of the border every morning will see that Jewish star in front of his face. Everything they put us through. But more importantly, it's here for us. It's here, if he told me, if the flag isn't up and someone comes up to Tel Saki, all he sees is the monument with these beautiful faces of these young guys who paid the heaviest price. And he understands that this is a place of death. And it's very depressing. What Dan said to me, he said, Tel Saki is not a hill of death. It's a hill of life. It's a hill of choosing life. And we honor the fallen ones, and we tried, like we did tonight, to understand not just how did they die, but mainly how did they live? What were their values? What did they love doing? What can we take from their life? What can we take and cherish and continue? And we always have to remind ourselves, also as painful as it is, that this is the price of freedom. A week ago, we were very sad and shed a tear on Yom HaShoah, where 6 million Jews died because there was no state of Israel. My great-grandparents died in Auschwitz. Menachem is named for his grandfather, killed in Auschwitz. And a week later, tonight, we're sad and we're shedding tears, not for the price of what happens when you don't have your own army and own state, but what is the price of having your own army and own state? And the flag is here to remind us, as Dan told me, that freedom has a price. There's a price for the only Jewish state in the world, for the first independent Jewish state after 2,000 years. And you pay the price, unfortunately, and you're on the floor bleeding and in pain. And then you just have to get back on your feet and continue moving forward because there's no other way. And I think tonight we experienced this, and Hava, we want to thank you for sharing with us your story and the story of Jacob and the story of your family. And you guys, first of all, we embrace you every day, but especially this day. And just want to say you guys really inspire us in how to choose life every single day, again and again and again.
I want to thank you for inviting me, but also for taking care of the site, because I know you're the flag person and the person on site. I've heard stories about that, and I really thank you for taking such good care of this wonderful monument. And of course, to Dan Almagor and to Lezi Agassi and Menachem Ansbacher and all the men who got together and made the monument, collected the money, did it all themselves. Another interesting thing about it is there are no
Ranks.
There are no ranks. They're just names and photos, which is very original and very moving. Just it gives me a place to be on a day like tomorrow and on other days. And I come home, I'm sad, I shed a tear, especially when we all stand in line and hold a flower for each fallen soldier, and you see so many people and you realize how many fell here. But then I come home with pride. So thank you.
And we invite everyone here, when you're in Israel, if you live in Israel, to come to Tel Saki. It's open 24/7. You can come and join us and visit the site, of course, and pay tribute to the fallen soldiers and hear the incredible stories. And in this October, it's going to be 50 years. We're going to have a big event. You'll probably hear about it in the media. Friends, I hope we all contributed to. I hope we were able to contribute to a meaningful Yom HaZikaron program, Yom HaZikaron, and we, in 24 hours now, we'll wish you already a happy Independence Day, part of living here in Israel. Toda Rabba and Toda Hava, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for everyone for participating. Thank you for our sponsors, and we'll send you by email the recording. No worries. I see a lot of people writing us. Toda Rabba, everyone. Toda Hava. Thank you so much.